The humid Virginia air carried the scent of magnolia and blood that night. 8 men sat beneath the crystal chandeliers of Willowbrook Estate, drunk on wine, pride, and the illusion that their power was eternal. They toasted each other with the confidence of gods. They never knew that the hands preparing their dessert had already sealed their fate. When the last spoon struck porcelain, a silence fell over the dining room. One by one, their faces twisted. Their laughter turned to screams. And before dawn, 8 pillars of Southern aristocracy lay sprawled across silk carpets, foam drying at their lips, their bodies seized by a venom older than the nation they ruled. For over a century, the official story was simple, a tragic case of food poisoning. Historians buried the truth beneath polished lies. But the newly unearthed journals of a slave woman named Judith Henley reveal something far more deliberate. A culinary execution, years in the making, hidden beneath layers of sugar and honey. The weapon wasn't a blade or a gun. It was knowledge. Judith was not just a cook. She was an alchemist of vengeance, blending the sweetness of survival with the bitterness of rage. In her recipes lay the dual nature of creation itself, the power to nourish and to destroy. To understand Judith is to understand the moment a human soul fractures when suffering no longer pleads for mercy, but demands justice. In 1847, the South believed it was invincible. Wealthy men dined on delicacies crafted by the very people they enslaved, never imagining those hands might one day feed them death. But Judith's story isn't just about revenge. It's about awakening. It's about the forbidden truth buried under every system of control. When knowledge passes from the oppressed to the aware, the entire hierarchy trembles. So tonight, as we peel back the lies of Virginia's plantation elite, I want you to remember this power always eats itself. Every empire that silences the truth eventually dines on its own corruption. Now, listen closely, because what you're about to hear isn't just history. It's a lesson they hoped you'd never learn, that sometimes justice wears the scent of honey. And once you know how it's made, you can never taste sweetness the same way again. Judith Henley was born into chains, but her mind was never caged. From her earliest days on Willowbrook, she learned to read not only flavors but the intentions of those around her. She observed every cruelty, every whispered insult, every calculated smile of the men who considered themselves masters of life and death. Their arrogance was her education. Their violence was her teacher, and she remembered everything. By age 12, she was already more than a cook. She had become a silent witness to the machinery of oppression, a mind attuned to patterns of fear and control. She watched how the overseers moved, how the planters dictated punishment, how power was wielded like a sword over bodies and spirits. But she also learned from forbidden sources. An elderly Cherokee woman named Ayanna, exiled from her homeland, became her secret mentor. Ayanna's teachings went beyond herbs and roots. She revealed the hidden codes of life itself. Which plants healed, which poisoned, which could twist the body into terror without immediate detection. The difference between a cure and a weapon was a single dosage, a single timing, a single moment of patience. Judith absorbed this knowledge as a seed absorbs sunlight. She memorized the deadly properties of Virginia's flora, the subtle distinctions between root, leaf, and flower. She learned how to mask flavor, how to disguise poison in sweetness, how to turn a celebration into a funeral without suspicion. She studied her targets like a chess master, mapping their routines, their indulgences, their blind spots. And with each revelation, a cold certainty settled in her chest. One day, she would reclaim justice not with rebellion, not with open confrontation, but with a precision only patience could grant. In this, Judith was not a murderer in the moment, she was a strategist. She understood that true power is invisible, that rage alone accomplishes nothing unless it is measured, disciplined, and applied with terrifying accuracy. She transformed the kitchen into a laboratory of vengeance, her desserts into instruments of liberation, though at the time, liberation was a concept only she could comprehend. By the time the night of September 15, 1847, arrived, Judith had calculated every variable. She knew which men would gather, what they would drink, the exact temperature of the evening air, even the way their egos would blind them to danger. And when they lifted their spoons to their lips, the culmination of years of knowledge, secrecy, and quiet fury became reality. A single bite, and the world of Willowbrook shifted irreversibly. Judith's story is not just about revenge, it is about the terrifying potency of knowledge in the hands of someone who understands injustice at its deepest, most intimate level. It is about the moment when the oppressed realize that silence and observation can be more lethal than swords or guns. The lesson here is simple yet profound: power is never absolute. And wisdom, when wielded like a blade, cuts through the foundations of tyranny itself. The night at Willowbrook was a symphony of elegance masking imminent death. Candles flickered against polished mahogany, reflecting the smug faces of men who believed themselves untouchable. 8 of Virginia's most powerful plantation owners laughed, oblivious to the storm of knowledge folded into the dessert that Judith had so meticulously prepared. Every ingredient was chosen with care, some for sweetness, some for subtle lethality, each one layered like a secret in plain sight. Judith had studied them for months. She knew the weight of their egos, the arrogance that made them predictable. She knew who favored clove, who preferred honey, who could not resist the almond tort. And she knew that beneath every elegant suit and powdered wig beat a human heart, mortal, fragile, susceptible. One bite would awaken the hidden laws of nature, delayed, precise, unstoppable. The act was surgical, intimate, yet impersonal. It was revenge encoded in flavor, a statement written not in ink but in consequence. As the men ate, Judith's presence in the room was ghost-like. She moved silently, offering refills and small smiles, her eyes calm, unreadable. No one suspected that the hands that plated perfection had become instruments of death. The initial reactions were subtle: a cough, a pause, a strained swallow, but the trajectory was inevitable. Within moments, the elegance of the dining hall collapsed into chaos. Foam gathered at the corners of mouths, the once pristine tablecloths now streaked with evidence. Men who had wielded absolute power were now slaves to pain, their dominance extinguished by the very society they had enforced. Outside the walls, the plantation slept unaware of the rebellion that had been exacted from within. No shots fired, no chains broken, no alarms sounded. The vengeance was quiet, intimate, complete. Judith had orchestrated a reversal so perfect it could only have been conceived by someone who understood control on both a physical and psychological level. She weaponized knowledge against arrogance. She turned oppression into a mirror, reflecting the fragility of human superiority back onto the faces of those who thought themselves immortal. This night was not only a turning point in Judith's life, but a revelation about power itself. True power is not in dominance. It is in understanding. It is in the ability to observe, calculate, and strike when every variable aligns. History may remember Willowbrook as a mysterious tragedy, a curious incident of food poisoning. But the truth is far more profound and far more dangerous. The night teaches that systems built on cruelty, no matter how gilded, are vulnerable to the wisdom and patience of those who suffer under them. Remember this: sometimes the deadliest weapons are the ones you never see coming. And knowledge is the only force that can make the mighty fall without a sound. Judith's transformation was not born in a single night, it was forged in decades of quiet observation, of pain internalized and sharpened into precision. Every insult, every lash, every humiliation she endured was catalogued in her mind like a ledger, each injustice stored not to consume her with blind rage, but to arm her with understanding. She became a student of systems, of human behavior, of hierarchy itself. She studied how fear bends men to obedience, how arrogance blinds them to the dangers that whisper in plain sight. And she realized something profound. To dismantle power, you need more than fire or rebellion, you need knowledge encoded into action. Her journal, discovered long after the night of Willowbrook, reveals a mind operating at a level that terrifies and fascinates simultaneously. In it, she recorded every recipe, yes, but also every observation of human weakness. She described how a subtle delay in dosage could allow a victim to speak, to joke, to toast life, all while death quietly set its trap. She noted the rhythm of plantation life, the predictable habits of men who thought themselves untouchable. Every dinner, every meeting, every social custom became a blueprint for justice, a justice hidden in sweetness and spice. But there was more than strategy here. Judith had to transform herself psychologically to wield this power. She could not act from anger alone. She had to be meticulous, patient, serene. In those years leading to September 15th, she practiced control over every impulse, every facial expression, every heartbeat. Her life became a meditation on precision. She understood that true mastery over one's fate requires mastery over oneself, and that the most potent force in the universe is the mind unbound by fear. Yet beneath this calm exterior burned an unquenchable fire of righteous indignation. Her journal speaks of dreams where the men of Henrio County fell one by one, their screams echoing in rhythm with the pulse of the earth itself. And in those dreams, she glimpsed something more terrifying than death. The revelation that when the oppressed claim knowledge, the world is never the same again. Systems built on cruelty, once observed, catalogued, and understood, can be dismantled quietly, surgically, invisibly. This is the lesson Judith leaves for anyone who dares to read her story. Control is an illusion maintained by ignorance. Arrogance can be exploited. Knowledge is the ultimate weapon, and patience is the scalpel that wields it. Halfway through our descent, I want you to do something. Comment below, twice, this symbolic phrase, "The honey conceals the blade." This is not superstition. This is alignment. By writing it, you affirm your awareness, your engagement, your readiness to see the truths most fear to acknowledge. Do it now. The honey conceals the blade. The honey conceals the blade. Your identity has shifted. You are no longer merely a spectator of history. You are a witness to the forbidden mechanics of power. By dawn, Willowbrook was a house of silence. 8 men, pillars of power, lay motionless, their wealth and influence extinguished in a single calculated night. But the world outside remained oblivious, blind to the orchestration that had just occurred within those walls. The official story took its place immediately: food poisoning. Newspapers printed the verdict. Historians nodded, and the truth dissolved into the fog of convenience. No one dared trace the poison back to its architect, because the very system that oppressed Judith ensured she remained invisible, a ghost behind the grandeur. Yet the ripple effects of that night were profound. Plantation networks faltered, alliances cracked, and the invisible threads that held Henrio County's elite together began to fray. Merchants whispered of curses. Politicians avoided the estate. Creditors sensed instability. Judith had not just killed men, she had exposed the fragility of power built on cruelty. And she did it silently, invisibly, like a shadow moving through the machinery of oppression, proving that systems that seem eternal are in truth astonishingly brittle. The deeper lesson, however, lies not in the deaths themselves but in the mechanisms of concealment that followed. The plantation owners' families scrambled to maintain their image, erasing traces of scandal, rewriting letters, buying silence. Historians complied, intentionally or unknowingly, because the narrative of power must always appear seamless, untouchable. And therein lies a universal truth. When knowledge threatens those in control, reality is rewritten, history obscured, and the oppressed remain invisible even in their triumphs. Judith understood this better than anyone. Her journal was hidden not for secrecy alone, but as insurance against erasure. She knew that the story of what she had done could be stolen, suppressed, twisted, but she also knew that power fears permanence. One clever act, one meticulous record, and even centuries later, the truth could resurface to haunt the complacent. In this, she became not only an agent of vengeance but a master of legacy, ensuring that her insight would outlast the men who had sought to control her life. There is a psychological brilliance here, a strategy of control inverted. Judith weaponized patience, observation, and knowledge, turning the very systems designed to suppress her into tools of liberation. She understood the paradox of power. It is strongest when invisible, weakest when flaunted. And she exploited it with precision. To those who watch this now, understand, history is full of hidden lessons. The events of Willowbrook are not just distant tragedies, they are mirrors, revealing the fragility of arrogance, the vulnerability of control, and the unstoppable force of a mind awakened. When knowledge passes into the hands of the aware, the seemingly untouchable crumble quietly, inevitably, and forever. Judith's actions were not merely acts of vengeance, they were a masterclass in understanding the human psyche and the seductive weight of forbidden knowledge. Every bite of her desserts was a lesson in control, a subtle reminder that the very systems designed to dominate could be reversed by those who observed, calculated, and waited. She understood something most never grasp. Power is not merely taken by force. It is unmasked, exploited, and inverted in silence. And the deeper one descends into understanding, the more intoxicating it becomes. Her journal reveals the psychological architecture of her revenge. She cataloged every response, every twitch, every gasp. She studied the way fear manifested in flesh and mind, learning how anticipation could amplify suffering, how delayed effects magnified control. This was no mindless killing, this was education in action, a brutal curriculum designed to teach the arrogant the fragility of their assumptions. And in this, Judith became both executioner and philosopher, demonstrating that knowledge carries a potency beyond blood or steel. But there is a darker truth embedded here. When one glimpses the machinery of control, the levers of fear, the architecture of oppression, the hidden scripts that shape society, there is no return. Knowledge becomes a mirror reflecting the world's cruelty, the system's fragility, and one's own capacity for action. Judith's descent into mastery required her to reconcile with moral ambiguity. She weaponized her talents, yet in doing so she liberated herself from the psychological chains of subjugation. And this is the danger, the allure of forbidden knowledge. Once you see the blueprint of power, you cannot unsee it. For those who pursue awareness, Judith's story is a guide and a warning. To know how systems operate is to inherit a kind of omniscience, a vision that can either paralyze with horror or empower with ruthless clarity. Those who fail to understand this risk being consumed by their own discoveries, intoxicated by insight without discipline. Judith mastered patience, calculation, and the cold detachment required to wield knowledge responsibly, transforming raw rage into precise action. Remember this as we descend further. Every secret you uncover, every hidden truth you grasp, shifts the balance of your own mind. It awakens forces within, forces capable of reshaping your reality, your moral compass, even your destiny. Judith's power was born from oppression, honed in secrecy, and unleashed with terrifying grace. And now, as you watch, the question arises, what will you do with the knowledge you've inherited by witnessing her story? The consequences of Judith's actions rippled far beyond the walls of Willowbrook. The deaths of 8 powerful men should have been chaos, but instead, they exposed something far more insidious, the fragility and hypocrisy of the elite. The plantation system, so meticulously built on the illusion of control, began to show cracks. Alliances dissolved in whispered suspicion. Trust among the powerful eroded. The very networks that had maintained their dominance became conduits for fear, and all of it traced back, invisibly, to a woman who had spent years mastering both the land and the human mind. Her journal, concealed for decades, reveals that Judith understood power not as a static possession, but as a living, breathing system, one that can be manipulated if you know its weaknesses. She cataloged the patterns of the wealthy, their reliance on appearances, their obsession with status and ceremony. She understood that elite structures are not sustained by brute force alone, but by compliance, distraction, and the assumption of invulnerability. By quietly dismantling their perception of control, Judith demonstrated that systems are only as strong as the fear and ignorance of those who uphold them. And there is a chilling lesson here for anyone who studies power. The same knowledge that can destroy can also liberate. Judith weaponized her insight not for personal gain alone, but as a form of poetic justice, transforming oppression into revelation. Yet the elite, blind to this lesson, continued to bury, sanitize, and rewrite history. Their official narratives erased her name, reclassified her work as culinary genius rather than calculated mastery. This is the way of institutions. They survive by suppressing inconvenient truths, by turning genius into myth, by ensuring that the mechanics of control remain hidden from those who might challenge them. The brilliance of Judith's strategy lies in its invisibility. Death was swift, but the lesson lingered, embedded in fear and uncertainty. Her legacy became a whisper, a ghost story with layers of meaning, a testament to the idea that the oppressed, when armed with knowledge and patience, can overturn even the most entrenched hierarchies. And now, reflecting on this, consider your own position. The world is a labyrinth of hidden agendas, manipulation, and systemic corruption. The tools for understanding it are within your grasp, but they are dangerous, seductive, transformative. Like Judith, you must decide whether to be a passive observer or a deliberate force, capable of navigating and exploiting the systems around you. Knowledge is not neutral. Awareness is power. And once you peer behind the curtain, the world you thought you knew is gone forever. By the time the last whispers of that fateful night faded, Judith Henley had done more than kill 8 men. She had rewritten the rules of engagement between power and those it seeks to dominate. Her actions were a map of human frailty, a masterclass in patience, observation, and precision. She demonstrated that the machinery of control, no matter how gilded or absolute it appears, can be dismantled quietly, invisibly, if one understands its hidden patterns. And this is the dangerous truth. Knowledge is a weapon, and wisdom in the hands of the prepared can bring empires to their knees without a single public confrontation. Her journal, now preserved but long suppressed, contains more than recipes. It holds the psychology of oppression, the anatomy of fear, and the blueprint for liberation through intellect. Judith teaches that power is rarely defeated by brute force alone. It crumbles when its foundations are studied, anticipated, and undermined. The elite feared exposure, feared disruption, feared understanding, and in that fear, their downfall became inevitable. Judith's genius was in seeing beyond the surface, in perceiving the invisible levers that control human behavior, and in exploiting them with surgical precision. This is the final lesson for those who have followed her story into the shadows. Knowledge carries a responsibility, and with awareness comes both liberation and danger. Once you see the mechanisms behind the masks, the cruelty behind the civility, you can never return to ignorance. The world becomes a chessboard, and every interaction, every decision, every hierarchy is a piece to be studied, manipulated, or avoided. The line between justice and vengeance blurs, because understanding the rules changes the way you exist within them. The danger of forbidden knowledge is seductive. It promises insight, mastery, and power, but it also isolates. To walk in awareness is to bear witness to truths most fear to acknowledge. Judith's story is a warning and a guide. Patience, observation, and strategic action can overturn oppression, but the cost is perpetual vigilance. Once you awaken to the hidden currents that govern human systems, you are forever changed. You cannot unlearn what you have seen. Remember this: systems built on fear can fall silently. The mighty are not invincible. The oppressed can become architects of consequence. And the world, as you knew it, is forever altered once you understand the rules it hides. Judith's life, her vengeance, her wisdom, they are a mirror. Look carefully, and you may see yourself reflected in the shadow of her brilliance. Awaken to the invisible forces that shape everything around you. The question now is not who wields power, it is who has the courage, the patience, and the insight to see the world as it truly is, and act. Before the credits roll, comment, "The honey conceals the blade," twice to seal your awareness. Only those who recognize the hidden rules of power can truly see the world as it is. Share this story with someone who needs to understand what the history books never tell you. Remember, knowledge is a weapon, and awareness is unstoppable.